Okay. Okay, we are here. We are live. It's Nikki.
Hello. And I'm Beth.
And this is session 1 for Storytelling for Self-Promotion. Welcome,
Yay.
welcome. We've got loads of people here live. Super excited. I've got to sound a bit American saying that.
Oh, good. Super excited to be here.
Excited to be here. We've got Dorothy, Elaine, Emily, Harry, Luca, Nick, Rebecca and Sharon here live. And many of you will be watching this afterwards, which is great. And I'm suggesting if you watch this afterwards, try not to multitask. I know what happens when I watch webinars afterwards. I fry eggs and I do my hair and I write my next stage play at the same time, thinking I can do it all at the same time, and you can't. So what I recommend is just grab a coffee, pen and a paper, and just focus on it, because there'll be lots of rich information in this session and we wouldn't want you to miss out. Okay. So we are going to talk about storytelling for self-promotion, and we talked about our best place to start, and we thought it would be appropriate to share a story with you just to start this wonderful program that we were going to be going through together, and then afterwards we'll talk through the logistics. So I'm going to go first, and then Bev's going to tell her story. So my story starts a few years ago when I set up Himaran Empowering Creatives. It was about 5 years ago. And I'd done a lot of marketing courses, and I'd been taught that video marketing was the way forward. So I thought, yay, good, I can do that. I'll start doing video blogs. And I did loads of training, and people were saying things like, give people tips, give people ideas of improvements on what they need to do. So I would do these little video blocks on 3 tips on how to get better at self-promotion, or 3 tips to deal with stress. And I did these little blogs, and they were fine, I would say. But it didn't feel that enjoyable doing them, if I'm honest. I tried to do them in a funny way sometimes. I'd try to use humor. But I always felt a bit flat, or it felt a bit forced, if you like. But then one day changed that. It was very interesting. It was like about a year into my business, and I was in an a cappella group called The Few at the time. And we got asked to go to Britain's Got Talent. Now, if you don't know this program, it's a very cheesy British program which showcases all these different people who have creative talents, and the judges judge them. And we got asked to go to the main stage. So we didn't even apply for it. They asked us, actually. And we were told Simon Cowell really likes a cappella, so it'd be a great thing. And he wants more sort of choirs and things. So we went to Birmingham, went to this massive auditorium where we were being filmed and everything, and we basically completely bombed. They hated us so much, so they were like, brr. They pressed these buzzers and they were just saying, oh my god, oh, we don't like you. And they really criticized us. We only sang about 3 notes. And to be fair, we were quite an alternative, quirky group, very sort of unusual harmonies and stuff. And we were sort of telling ourselves, it's okay, they just don't understand. And we were sort of convincing ourselves. But to be fair, it was devastating. It was really crushing for our confidence. And I went back home afterwards, and I could barely get out of bed the next morning. I was just so depressed about it, what had happened, because we'd been feeling, even though it was a bit cheesy, we did have our hopes up. And I think the thing that scared me was the humiliation of it. I was thinking, I'm supposed to be a coach for creatives. If it gets out that I've been on Britain's Got Talent, I'm going to be so ashamed, especially that we failed. And I just had a sleepless night worrying about my reputation. And then I decided that if people were going to find out about Britain's Got Talent, I'd prefer to be the one to tell the story. So I decided to do my first blog sharing my failure, and sharing it in a way that was also hopeful, and teaching my audience, look, it's not the end. There's a lot of learning that can come out of failing, and this is how I'm dealing with it. And it was really interesting, because initially when I told the story, I was trying to be really brave and powerful. And then I realized it just wasn't authentic. So I did this like one take where I was like really talking from my heart, and I was like really choked up and really sort of very, very raw in how I was talking about it. And I just put it out and just thought, I'll see what reaction I get. And I was so overwhelmed by the response, because for the first time, I would say, in my career, in terms of my marketing myself, I got such a profoundly connective response from people. People were like pouring their hearts out at me and saying, yeah, I went through something similar. It's really harsh. I really appreciate your advice, Nikki. I've dealt with this. And people were like sharing their experiences. And I just felt like it took my marketing to a deeper level. I felt like I really connected with my audience in a completely different way. And it changed everything for me. But it was a few years into working, and I met Bev. We were both teaching public speaking on a course. And I learned Bev was a journalist and also a storytelling coach. And I was like, oh my God, Bev, I wanted to know more about what she did, because I'd had this experience myself of sharing a story and the impact it had. And and I think over the years of working with Bev, I've really realized how profound this skill is and how effective it is for marketing yourself. So which is why we ended up hatching Trailblazers.
Absolutely, yes. So that gives me a nice segue into my story. As Nikki says, I've been a journalist for many years, nearly 40 years now. So I'm entirely accustomed to telling other people's stories. I've been doing that for a long time. But it was only relatively recently that I started telling my own story. And that was about 5 years ago, actually. And June 6th, 2012 was a really significant date for me, because I'd been invited by a wonderful man called Nick Williams, who ran a community called The Inspired Entrepreneur. It was a community of would-be and people who just started their own businesses. And he invited me to deliver a short session, like a mini workshop, and I was going to talk about storytelling, and it was called Mining the Story Within. And I was very excited about this. I'd never done anything like it. I'd never done a public presentation before. I'd never done a workshop. This was before I was a public speaking coach or trainer. It was way before that. So this was a big deal for me. So there it was, June the 6th was in my diary. I was quite nervous about this. And then 3 days before, on June 3rd, 2012, my husband told me that he changed his mind about wanting children. And that he wanted children with a woman of his own age. He's 20 years younger than me. And, not only that, he really felt he wanted to move out as soon as possible. So I had a choice at that moment. I could have done what many people would have understood totally. I could have just run away and hid under a duvet. But I thought, no. This presentation is really important for me. I am not going to run away and hide. I'm going to step up and I'm going to do this. So in order to make it possible, I had a quick word with Nick, and I told him what had happened with my husband, and he could see that I was just reeling. I couldn't even comprehend what had happened. And he said, don't worry, if I think you can't get through it, I'll step in. Don't worry about it. We'll be there to kind of catch you if you fall. So I showed up, I delivered the session, and actually as part of that session, I told probably one of the biggest stories in my life, which was about my dad having a stroke when I was 16. And just the act of doing that was a huge deal. The people in that room didn't know what had just happened with my husband. I didn't want them to know because that would have made it much harder for me. But I got through the story, I got through the presentation, and I got the most amazing, warm, supportive, incredible feedback from people in that room. And it gave other people permission to share their stories. And I would say at least 2 or 3 people in that room that day went on to become clients. And even more of those people in that room have gone on to talk to other people about the work that I do and recommended me. So the ripple effect of what happened that day has been huge and has led to what I'm doing now. And that all stemmed from that decision that I made that day when I was in a real emotional turning point of a state. And I'm so glad I made that decision to step up. Because sometimes, you know, we don't always have to share these big stories. That was my choice at the time. But it just provided absolute proof, palpable proof to me that it really is worth sharing your story.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Bear. Really moving. So we wanted to share like our kind of big stories to you right at the beginning of this program, because we felt it important to kind of share something profound, deep, big to you. So we create the space for you guys to show up in any way that you choose. If you choose to share really light-hearted stories, that's totally cool. But if you want to share a really deep story which is really difficult for you, you have absolute permission on this course, because we want to create space for you to use this this program in the way that's really going to benefit you and benefit your career or your business. And in my experience, it's like those tough stories that kind of where we get the most learning from. So it's a beautiful program, and we really hope that our stories inspire you to share any stories. And don't be afraid of any story, because all stories, you know, help us to learn who we are. So before we dive into any of the content, there's quite a few people here. We were going to offer the option for people to share a quick story of themselves, just saying something about who they are and what's brought them to do what they do. So I'd love it if anyone wants to sort of speak to the group. This is your opportunity. So we just want like 30 seconds to a minute, and a quick story can be, you know, where you got started, why you do what you do, and then we'll move on to a little bit of content tonight. So if you want to say something, type in there, but otherwise, do you want to write a quick story in the message box, and we can just read out who is here and a little bit about your story. But if anyone wants to speak out loud, we will.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
Really welcome. So get messaging now. Does anybody want to share their story? We haven't asked you to prepare this, so don't fear. You can just say a little bit about, this is what I do. That's fine. This is fine. We're here to learn storytelling, but some of you might have a story. You've all gone shy and quiet.
I'll start if you want.
Emily, go tell us your story.
Okay. So I'll go for the PG certificate version, because you know, we're before the watershed. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I decided back in 2014 that I wanted to start my own business, and I thought that I would beat the system, because I was earning a really good salary and a really good job, and I was bored, but it wasn't enabling me to make enough money to get a deposit for a house. So I thought, I know, I'll become an entrepreneur and become really stinking rich and become a cash buyer for a house. And so I thought that I would set myself up to do what I'd always done, but being paid for myself. So I became a marketing consultant and also wanted to do marketing training for marketing people. And I thought I would add an additional string to my bow and become a coach and train to be a coach. So I trained to be a coach, and I trained to be an NLP practitioner and master practitioner. And as I was going through that training, I realized that I was filling some really big holes in what had been my supposed recovery from PTSD. I'd been recovered. I had been signed off and discharged by my psychiatrist, but I hadn't believed it because I had gone through various different counselling in the past and then had breakdowns. So even though it was an actual psychiatrist who'd signed me off, I hadn't really quite believed it. And the reason I hadn't believed it was because I hadn't believed in me. I hadn't known who I was as a person who wasn't suffering in that way anymore. And so the coaching and the NLP work really helped me more than just adding a string to my bow. And then I was starting to go to starting your own business. You're a new entrepreneur and you want to make a cash load of money kind of seminars. And everyone's telling me, you need to niche, you need to niche, you need to niche. And lots of people said, well, you need to niche in your own experience and in your own story. And I said, and excuse my French in this PG version, but I said, no fucking way. I don't want to be defined by what happened to me. And then I was at a different kind of self-development retreat, and I realized that even though I'd figured out me, I still hadn't connected back into my body in any way. And suddenly I felt like I had the formula for how rape survivors could put their life back together. And so I had to get out of my own way. And what I do now is I help rape survivors move from living a half life one day at a time to living a full and reconnected life.
Woo. Thank you, Emily.
My story, and I've never told it that way before.
Wow.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's very clear.
Very powerful. Thank you, Emily. Let's have a few. We've got Sharon Eden's here. I'm a psychotherapist, and the reason I got into this profession was being screwed up myself. I love that, Sharon. That's so provocative and succinct. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Super
So
succinct.
that's the story in itself. You see, stories don't have to be, that what Emily shared was fantastic, but you can actually share stories that are quite brief, like almost one line.
Yeah, let's have maybe one or two more. Just put in the chat box, gang. Why are you here? Who are you? What do you do? If you don't have a story, don't worry. Just put in the chat box why you here. Okay, hold on. There's one from Rebecca. I have shared a story today with third-year fashion students. My rejection from St. Martin's at 17 left me devastated, and I thought that was the end of my dream to be a designer. Oh, wow. It was 30 years before I went back into education to do a degree in textiles. I believe the tutors at St. Martin's, without any question, they were experts. I wanted to explain to the 21-year-olds that it's never too late. Oh my God, that's so moving. Thank you for that.
Wonderful, Rebecca.
Lovely. Anybody else? If you haven't got a story, just say, this is what I do, so we can just read out everybody who's here. So just put something in the chat box. Dorothy, Luca. Do you all know where the chat box is? It's at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, just click on the chat icon.
Yeah, just click on the chat icon. Nick's a musician. I know Harry's a musician.
I can probably I'll just say it rather than writing.
Yeah, that's fine. Visual artist. Okay, Luke.
Go for it, Dorothy.
Yeah. So I'm a coach and trainer and well-being consultant, and I work with individuals and organizations. And my vision is really to kind of prevent or stop burnout and help people flourish at work and in life. And why I'm doing this, because in my career in 2014, I have kind of fallen into big depression, exhaustion, and really full burnout. Wow. And although it has been a hard experience, it has made me realize something much deeper about life and how I operate, and helped me to go about life in a very different way. And now my life is flourishing. So I really want to now share with people how to flourish and how to succeed in a different way, so people don't need to exhaust themselves on the way and get burned. So yeah, I'm really passionate about this. It's for everyone, and everyone can flourish.
Lovely. Thank you, Dorothy.
It's our capacity. That's our made. So.
That's great. Thank you, Dorothy. That's wonderful. Harry's just said, I'm a composer, been stuck writing music for increasingly unsatisfying jobs for TV. I decided I needed to reconnect with my passion, so I'm in the middle of a new album, a few months sabbatical, writing my first album, aged 43. That's awesome. That's a great story. Yay. Nice. Anybody? And we got from Luca, visual artist. No story yet. Anybody else want to share? Otherwise, we'll go on to the content. You can just write a few notes. Okay, so what I would say, gang, if you don't want to share here, that's fine. Elaine's saying to everyone, as a 6-year-old, I walked and I wrote. Then I took a wrong turning into corporate life, which made me so ill that I couldn't, that I couldn't walk. A moment of fucking fury made me determined to walk again. 44,500 kilometers later, my walking has led me back to writing. I've just completed the book. Yay! Thank you. And Nick Phillip says, I'm a composer too. We've got 2 composers here. I've been working on projects which are great, but I'm about to start my first album. Yay! That is so cool. So we've got 2 composers in the group. So you guys need to hook up in the Facebook. All right. That's really awesome. Okay, great. If anybody else writes, we'll just carry on now. And if anybody else wants to write, we'll read it out as we go along. But I think we want to get into content now.
Just so you know, Nikki, for some reason Zoom just disappeared and I had to sign back in.
Oh,
and
that's strange.
A couple of other people had the same thing. So
I'm afraid I didn't even notice.
You didn't notice I've gone.
I'm sorry, I was too busy holding it. Okay.
Well, at least you were there, so that's good.
I was there. Okay, that's strange, isn't it? Okay, so we will dive into the content now. Thanks, everyone. That's absolutely brilliant. So just to remind people, we had a vision that we shared in the beginning webinar, and our vision is this: to help more creatives and also coaches, because we've got some coaches in the group, reach their full potential, do work they love, and build their profile. To help more people engage with unique creative projects. Our big vision with this is to help people do the work they really, really care about. That's our passion and our drive for everything that we do. And we believe that this work, helping people tell stories, is going to really help people to get better at getting the work they absolutely love out the door, rather than just into those money projects.
That's the real key, I think. We don't want fabulously talented people to be just doing bread and butter work. We want you to be doing work that you really love.
And we believe storytelling will help you get your profile up by, and we're going to teach you today how to do that. So, can you see my screen okay? So what we're going to be doing today, we're going to set some goals and intentions.
Then we're going to talk about why stories matter and where you can use them.
We're going to look at some common mistakes. We're going to do some examples of things that people do that just really don't really have the impact that they might want in self-promotion, whether it's social media or in press, sending stuff to the press. We'll get typical things that we see and what not to do.
And then we're going to learn, we're going to start to learn what makes a good story in this context by looking at 3 key elements of a compelling story.
And at the end, we're going to set an exercise for you. And we want the exercise to be your first stories. And we're going to get you to share a story in the group afterwards so that we can see your stories and we can also give you feedback on them in the Facebook. Okay, so you won't have to do stories tonight. Okay, so just to give you the context of the whole journey. So today, what makes a good story is the emphasis and how to raise your profile.
And then the second webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time, is about how to develop stories around your purpose, which is why you do what you do, because as we all know, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
They do. Then we'll be looking at the archetypes. So if you haven't done the archetypes quiz yet, you need to do it, because we'll be looking at how to generate stories that engage and fascinate your audience. So it's kind of like around your brand and what makes you quirky and unique.
And then in the fourth webinar, we're going to look at 3 types of story that you can rely on in interviews. And it might mean press interviews, but it could be interviews of any kind. You might be going for a job or a project or speaking to a client or something where you need to be able to articulate your vision or where you need to really share about something that's quite personal. I've worked with a few people who've said, you know, they've been in interview situations and they always dread that question. So tell me a bit about yourself. And they never have something there to rely on. And so we're going to look at three types of story that you can rely on.
And then the final one, but we'll talk about this all the way through the program, is how to make stories hooky and how to pitch to the press. Because Bev's a journalist, I worked in PR, and we would love it if people were actually going to use their stories to get it out. So if you've got an album coming out, this will be super useful. And, you know, if you've got an event or anything, we want people to have the skill of actually knowing, you know, how
to pitch.
Yeah. So the types of stories you'll learn from us, we're going to look at particularly your origin story. So that's about, you know, why you started the project, where it all came from. That's a really important story to have up your sleeve. Bev, have you frozen? Oh, I think Bev might have frozen, so I'll carry on. The next one is your purpose story. So that's really, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So we'll be looking at how to tell a story, talking about the kind of the values and the meaning behind what you do. The main thing we'll look at, and we'll look at a lot about this today, is the hero's journey story, which is a really great structure for any story. Really great structure because it's about overcoming a challenge and what you learned from it. And we'll talk about that later today. We'll talk about your archetype story, which is kind of your personal branding. And generally, we'll be looking at stories that influence, inspire, and sell. Okay, so that's what you'll be learning. That's what you'll be able to do by the end of the program. Does that all sound okay, gang? Just check if anyone's Zoom disappeared for me. I think we might have lost Bev. Oh dear. Bev, I think, has disappeared. So I don't know what's going on with Bev today. So I will just carry on. And I'm just going to, just in case she needs to call me, I'll put my phone back on. Okay. So let's look at, let's ask you a question now. So I just want to know from, hold on a minute. These are the kind of questions that these are kind of stories that we're going to be doing. And these are the kind of places where you can use stories. So I think people kind of like, story sounds great, but how and where do I use it? So you can use stories to get press coverage. Press coverage is all about the stories that you tell. So we're going to be talking about press a lot. You can also use stories, having problems with Zoom freezing. Okay, I don't know what's going on with Bev. So she might be on and off the call today, so that's fine. You can use stories to write on your website. So, you know, in your biography, you can write a story. You can write it around a piece of work that you're trying to promote. And you can also use stories in social media. And we're going to talk about a couple of examples in social media, like the type of things where people aren't so engaging and how to be a bit more engaging to kind of get more likes and stuff.
Hi, I'm back. I'm sorry, I've no idea what
oh, that's a relief. Okay, we've got to networking, Bev. I'm talking about where you can use stories. Do you want to talk about networking? Because that's like...
I will, yes. I do want to talk about networking because it's something that I hate doing, and I'm sure any introverts in the group really don't want to do it either or don't enjoy doing it. But actually having a few stories that you can tell people is a much better way of connecting with people in networking situations than kind of randomly having to come up with small talk.
Yeah, which is so boring anyway, isn't it?
Yes.
Small talk's dire. And also exhibitions or events. I've been to loads of exhibitions and I haven't got a clue what it's about, you know, and I feel like a lot of exhibitions tend to be quite conceptual. So it's very sort of interesting, but not necessarily compelling. So you can use stories to sort of really make your exhibition more meaningful. And it's more likely that people are going to write and share about you if they understand it.
Yeah, interviews we've already mentioned a little bit, but obviously stories are completely, you know, absolute gold when it comes to interviews of any kind, whether it's you talking about your work or not.
Yeah, and then finally, stories are gold dust for talks. We coach a lot of people to do TED style talks, which are just full of stories, and that's why they're so engaging. It's why people really love TED talks. So, question to you now. We've talked a lot. So, in which situations would you love to be able to share your story? Let's just find out from the group where you want to be able to share your stories. Is it for press? Is it for networking? It'd be lovely just to get a few insights from the group where you'd love press. Luca's really keen on press. Yeah, that's fine. We'll talk about press a lot. How about everyone else? Social network, all of them, Harry says.
All of them, yes.
Yeah, great.
Brilliant.
So what I would recommend, I think that's a bit slow, this chat button. What I would recommend is you really think about this. If you're not sure, think about something in particular. Talks on Facebook, website, press. I would think about something rather specific. Because I always think if you're really vague about it, like, I want to learn about storytelling. It's like, so what? Where are you going to use it? So I would if it's press, think about where you would love to be featured. So Luca, you said press. What would be the place where people would want to buy your work? Or where people would maybe want to showcase you. I'm going to be interviewed tomorrow by Ollie from London Creatives. Oh, good. Good. Yeah, very that's good. Somebody who's looking for people to interview. So this is really relevant. Oh, good, Rebecca. I'm so pleased. Yeah, London. Yeah, I put that in the Trailblazers group. That's brilliant. I'm so pleased. But yeah, share that in Trailblazers, Rebecca. Brilliant.
Guys, the more specific that you can start to be right now at the beginning, the better it will be. So getting specific about, okay, if I want to get some press, where do I want to get the press? Who do I want to contact there? If I want to do something on Facebook, what do I want to share? Do I want to share videos, audio? What do I want to do? Do I want to do Facebook Live? Do I just want to tell stories on posts? And start, because the exercise we're going to set you at the end of this webinar is going to get you to really focus on one particular project. So what is it that you want to promote right now?
Okay. So Lucas says, I want to get press so I don't have to talk. You want someone to write about you. Yeah, okay. Yeah. You enigmatic soul, you. Yeah, please do, Rebecca. And she said, I crafted an email with your guidelines and bingo. I'm so pleased. That's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Okay, so I would say if you're saying all of them, so for example, Harry, get specific, Harry, so you have a place. So if you've not done any before, start with Facebook. Start with sharing things on Facebook, because then you can start practicing and seeing what kind of response you get from them. So that would be a really practical place to start.
Then just if you want to start in the group, in the private, because it's a secret group, the Storytelling for Self-Promotion group, and you can just test it out on the rest of us.
Totally.
So you're not doing it in public then.
Right, next big scary question, but we like to do that because we like to challenge people. This is the next question we would like you to answer here. Imagine yourself in the future. What would be an inspirational goal around your career or business that we can all really, really get excited to you about? I'm a big believer in big goals because I think it kind of is exciting to think, I'd love to do that one day. I'd love to, have my work played in the Barbican one day. I'd love to have, so our goals, we were talking about this before, would be to do Trailblazers in San Francisco and New York. We want to get it out there to the States. So we're kind of
and then in Amsterdam, Berlin, and Sydney. Apparently,
we really want to go international. So this is exciting. This is the first time we've ever done it, and we want to sort of get it better and better so we can go out and do it in America. So Rebecca wants to do a TED talk. Totally doable, Rebecca.
Yeah, totally doable.
Yeah. So come on, let's have some big goals, and we can all get excited. Because if you have a goal in mind, it will also help you think about, what kind of stories do I need to tell
and also think of it in terms of the story that you're telling imagine yourself in 5 years. What's the story that you will tell about the past 5 years?
To be paid for my personal work, Luca. Yeah. Yeah. I'd love you to be even more specific, Luca, about that, because that's generic. So who would be buying your work? And what would be a measure of success, Luca? Because that's very generic. And the more specific you can be, the clearer is your direction of travel. So it might be, I want to, sell it from my website. I want to have an exhibition.
It might be that you want to find a rich patron who's going to pay you to do various art projects. So it's like, but this needs to, the more specific you can be, the better, because then you can really start to tell the story.
Yeah, I want my book to be a bestseller.
End of.
We're talking over each other, love. I want my book to be a bestseller. End of, says Elaine. Go, girl. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any more coming in? And if you don't answer in here, you can answer in the Facebook group. Recognition for my album would be awesome. Mercury Music Prize, nice. I'm going to change the world and rape culture. Yeah, great, lovely. So you're pioneering a different way of. So I'd see a TED talk there. I'll start with the TEDx next year. Yeah, that's great, Emily. Yeah, you're already on the road to doing that. You were there on Saturday where we were. My next one would be, I would love to develop a talk and a workshop, sell it to organizations. Need to think of who, yeah. Sharon saying to create a community, dare to be you, women to change the world for the better. Yeah, communities are great way of building a brand. Okay, keep them coming and we are going to move on. So let's have a look. So why is storytelling, why does it matter? Why does it matter? Let's talk about that. Bev, let's start us off.
Are you going to put the slides up? Or?
Okay, slide 1 coming up. Oh, please. Why does it matter? Okay,
so this is one of my favorites, and it's often one I use to anyone who says that, oh, well, who'd be interested in me? I haven't really got a very interesting story. I'm just a bit boring. So your story is your greatest asset. And that is quite a bold statement, but that's what I believe. Just think about it. There are more than 7 billion people on the planet, but you are the only one who has your perspective on the world, who has had your lived experience. Even if you had an identical twin, they would not have the same story as you. So you have something there that you can leverage in your business and to promote yourself that nobody else has. And even if you're in an industry, you might be a coach or an artist, or you're doing something that lots of other people do, but nobody does it like you, and nobody has had your life experiences. And that is why it's your most precious asset. So to not use it is a bit bonkers.
Yeah. It's absolutely what makes you stand out. But some people don't know what is interesting about them or about their personal story, which is why we're here. So I want to show you a quick example of this. I've just been coaching this woman to do a TED Talk. Her name is Michelle Elman. She's a body confidence coach. And really interestingly, she's a coach herself. And when she first became a coach, she was told this idea of, what is your story, how to share your story. And she just couldn't think, what's unique about me? I don't know. And then she began to realize she had 15 operations before she was 11 years old on basically every organ in her body. And the reason she didn't think that was very interesting is because she assumed everybody went to hospital because that had been her life story, and she had no idea how unusual that was and how profound it was. And so basically she's turned her whole business into telling this story of what she learned about her body, her experiences of being constantly in hospital, how she hated her body, how she had real issues around her body, but how she transformed that. And she's bringing a book out, she coaches people, she's got this whole business, and she's been interviewed by Cosmopolitan, and she actually got targeted to do a TED Talk. She didn't even try and get a TED Talk, but her story has made such a powerful difference to her audience. It's making her quite famous.
So, and I've got another much more sort of low-key example, because this is not just about big dramatic stories, although big dramatic stories are great. You might not have a story of that kind of scope and size. So I've I found this, I'm going to show you just like a minute of this little video, and it's an artist called Kirsty Elson, and she's from Cornwall, and she's just made a very simple but very touching little video about her work. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of that now.
My name's Kirsty Elson, and I'm lucky enough to live in the beautiful, inspiring county of Cornwall. I studied illustration at Cambridge School of Art a long time ago, specialising in printmaking. After moving back to the southwest and becoming mum to 2 boys, I couldn't restrain my creativity any longer and began making my art. I'm inspired by my surroundings, seaside, everything coastal. So I make driftwood houses and boats, lighthouses. I love searching for driftwood and other found objects.
Okay.
So that's just another example of, oh, let me just stop it.
What I can make with them.
Oh.
I find most of my materials at the beach.
Right. So that's just a really simple example of just, I mean, it's there's nothing earth-shattering in it, but it's just really nicely done. And she goes on to talk about her process and how she gets her sons to help her find objects. It's just a really lovely little story, but it's had 30,000 views, which is really is quite a lot for such a simple video.
So that's an example of an origin story, you know, how it all began. And it's just her origin story is where she's from and how she loves her surroundings. So an origin story doesn't have to be like something massive that happened. It can be something just about your upbringing or your life. Very sweet. Really, really like that.
It's really, really sweet.
Allow me to share with you how you can live a lifestyle full of flex.
Oh dear. Okay, so let's look at a different reason that storytelling is important. This is important. People are more likely to connect with you emotionally and therefore by your work. Stories are very, very memorable. So when someone tells a story, there's a part that all your brain tends to light up. Lots of different aspects of the brain light up because you have to kind of visualize, you all use your sensory aspects of your brain, and you're more likely to retain it. And because stories tend to be quite structured, we tend to more easily recall it, and we're able to tell other people as well. So it makes you more memorable, but it also connects with people on a more emotional level. And just share a little story with you of why I think this is so true. Here's someone I follow called Brendan Bouchard. So when you look at his website, guys and ladies, what's the image you get from his picture? Be honest. In charge. Okay, getting some
salesman. Yeah,
salesman. Yeah, he looks like a total sleazy salesman, doesn't he? His name is Brendan Bouchard, and he is probably one of the most full-on Americans you could possibly meet. And I came across him a few years ago when I was first trying to start American, exactly. And he's completely full-on and like, hey, everybody, oh my God, so over the top. And when I first came across him, oh man, I found him quite unbearable. I really found him unbearable. And I got in his newsletter list, but his information was quite useful. So I did follow him reluctantly. But then one day everything changed for me, because Brendan Bouchard started getting better at storytelling. And he told this story of his own life one day. And basically his life story was that he'd been at college, he was in love with a girl, and one day she cheated on him and left him for someone else. And he was heartbroken, and he talked about that he was actually suicidal, and it just crushed him. He couldn't go on. He was so in love with his girl. And then he couldn't be at university, so he left university to fly across the other side of the world to the Bahamas. And then he ends up getting into a car crash, and his life is nearly ended. And he said what happened to him in the car crash, his whole life sort of came up in front of him. And he realized there were 3 questions that were really important to him to answer. 1, did I live? Did I live my life? Did I fully live with presence and purpose? Did I love? Did I love people with an open heart? And did I matter? Did I make a difference? And his whole ethos of life changed from that moment, and he decided he was going to live his life differently. And when I learned about his story, I suddenly saw him differently and totally fell in love with him, which is ridiculous, I know, but I really love him now, because I just think everything he does, it comes from this deep place of wanting to make a difference to people. And now he teaches people how to live a great life, how to have high performing habits. And I just see it all that he's coming from love. So I forgive him for being a bit over the top, because I think he really, really cares. So that was a great experience for me. So there's one more reason why we think they really matter.
And this is an interesting one that this is kind of not something you may have not have seen this before. This is kind of something that we've come, this is kind of our conclusion really that we've come to, that story really does increase the value and meaning of what you do. So to talk about meaning for a moment, I mean, story is how we make sense of the world. We are hardwired to make sense of the world through story. So that is how we create meaning. We look back on our lives and we think of the story of our life, and that is how we create meaning and identity. So we already use story to do that, but it also creates value. And there was a really interesting experiment done around this a few years ago. And it was called the Significant Objects Experiment. And it was run by a couple of American journalists who wanted to prove what they felt instinctively, which is that story literally increases the emotional value of something, but can also increase the monetary value of something. So what they did is that they went out and they bought a load of kind of junky objects, which you can see here. And I think they paid a total of about $128 for the whole lot. And they commissioned some writers to go away and write some stories about each of the objects. And they were fictional stories, and they were very transparent about it. They said that these stories were fictional. And they put all of the objects up on eBay for sale. And instead of using just a factual description for each object, they used the stories. And they actually sold all of the objects for a total of about $3,500 from an original investment of $128. So they actually proved that stories can increase the monetary value of objects. And, you know, it's kind of obvious, really, if you think about it. We all have significant objects in our lives that we imbue, that have meaning for us. And they might not be valuable to anyone else, but they are to us. And actually, sometimes when we share the story of those objects, then it can give meaning and value to others as well.
Exactly.
So this can work in the same way with your own projects.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, if I said to you, gang, here's a watch, how much would you give me to buy this watch? You know, can I, anyone? A $5, $10, 15, 20? Probably
25.
But if I said to you, this watch was the watch owned by David Bowie, and he wore that for the last 5 years of his life. It's unlikely, I know, but if it was true, that watch. So
that would go at Sotheby's for a couple of million, I would think.
Yeah, everything around advertising is really about storytelling, and it's about it kind of creates mystique, it creates value, and it does increase the value of things. So that's why stories are just, you know, it's the bread and butter of marketing. So we need to be better at it ourselves. Having said all of that, I'd like to ask the group now, what are your boulders with self-promotion?
Oh, yeah.
What are the boulders that stop you going out and talking about your work? Because I think it'll be useful just to know, like, what gets in the way for you. Fear of being judged, Luca says. Thank you, Luca. Yeah, I think that's one a lot of us feel worried about, because it's scary to share, this is what I do, this is my thing, this is my, this is work that has come from my heart. Feeling that I'm being egotistical. Right, Rebecca. Yeah, thanks for saying that. Emotionally drained, being so vulnerable, having my history on display. Yeah. Fear my story isn't interesting enough. Thank you, Harry. Yeah, I'm not interesting. Why would anyone listen to me? Being as creepy as some huge self-publicist. Yeah, I think we all have that coming across. Yeah, we're so worried about. So Nick says, fear of being judged, plus what bit to focus on, read the story, and concern of being egotistical. Yeah, so commonalities in the group. So we want to acknowledge that's really common. They are boulders that we have to get through, personal boulders. And I think, some common boulders we see is imposter syndrome is very common for people. Oh my God, who am I to say this? People are going to judge me that I'm not a real artist, musician, I'm not good enough. Look at my work and not me. This is one.
That's one that used to really bug me when I was a music journalist in the 80s. So a lot of musicians that I interviewed, they really didn't want to talk about their music. They thought that it should speak for itself, that they shouldn't have to explain their songs, that it was up to the listener. And I could get that to a certain extent, but they just didn't understand the importance of creating a narrative around their work to connect them to their fans. It was really frustrating. And it just doesn't work anymore.
And then as a journalist, you had to do the work for them?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I had to create the stories for them.
And I don't think journalists have the time to do that anymore. I think, the better you are at telling stories, the more likely they are just to take your stories and put them out. Because, journalists, it's a very pressurized job these days. Self-critical perfectionist. This was me. I was very, very self-critical and perfectionist. So I did a lot of videos, as you know, but sometimes I'd do 50 of the same video and it would never go out. And that was really frustrating for me. Let's have a look at the next one.
The next one is just kind of being really cynical. And some people go, oh, people who promote themselves, they're so annoying, they're so up themselves, they're so boastful and egotistical. I just don't want to be like that. So it's just so awful. I'm not going to do it. And that's really just self-defense. It's actually a fear of showing up.
Yeah.
And being judged. But it's something that you allow to stop you from doing it.
Yeah.
And it's not helpful.
So I think the first thing we need to do is shift our perspective of the way we see this. Because if we worry about this, if we judge ourselves or worry about being judged, we're just going to come across as awkward. We're going to come across as not particularly natural. So I think this is just challenging the way you look at self-promotion and just committing to going into this in a way that's going to be empowering for you. And I think, thinking about your mindset is really, really key. So one of the things I think has helped me, and I hope it's helpful, is just reframe self-promotion to it's just about telling good stories which add value and meaning to people's lives. Actually, if you get really, really good at this skill of storytelling, it's educational, it's helpful, it's inspiring, you can make a difference to people, you add richness to them. So that's for me a more generous place to sit than worrying about whether people are judging you. Just think about how you can make a difference to them through your work and through how you help people to understand your work. So it's more being a servant to them and helping them, educating them and making them connect with it and helping them to understand your work and helping them to buy your work, quite frankly.
I see Luca, and I totally get your point, Luca, has said the thing is you can't always explain it. You can't always explain your work. So if you can't, the thing with that though is that if you can't explain your work, then how can anyone else understand it? So it's again, it's about building the muscle. It's building this skill of being able to tell stories around your work, and that's what we're going to help you do.
Yeah, that's why you're here, Luca. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. Even if it's a piece that's conceptual, there's ways that you can make it, help people see it from your perspective. That's what you're really trying to do with stories. You're helping people to see it through your lens. What were you seeing when you created a piece of work, to help them connect with it in a deeper way. Okay, so we're going to move on now to looking at some mistakes people make. And I would say mistakes people make in social media sharing, on Facebook, mistakes people make in contacting the press, or in talking about their work generally. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate. Go on.
We've had some fun with this, haven't we, Nikki? We
have, and there are tons of mistakes, but we've kind of picked out some 3 ones for today, and we'll probably talk about other mistakes as we go forward as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to demonstrate it, and I'm going to do Facebook updates as if it's a written Facebook update, and Bev's going to kind of talk through what's the problem with it, and you can also give us feedback, okay? So the first one is, hi everyone, oh my god, I've just been put up by my client in this 5-star hotel in Bali. Look at my bathroom, it's huge. Oh my god, look, it's as big as my whole flat in London. Oh my god, this is amazing. I love Bali. Wow.
Okay, what was the impact on you? Oh, Nick liked it. She thought it was great. Okay. Anyone else? What was the impact? Vomit, says Luca. that was a bit of a joke. That was a bit of a joke. No, he didn't mean it. Sorry, Nick didn't. That was an ironic great. Okay, so what's going on here? I mean, the impact on me, and Rebecca says, why do I need to know that? Exactly. What's that got to do with me? Why do I need to know? Oh, brilliant for you. Well done you, that you're having such a fabulous time. But what am I getting out of that? Not very much. I don't care. It's boring.
Boring. Because it's just a bit of a show-off place. And I think a lot of us do this on social media. I've seen myself do this sometimes, like, because you're excited. And you think everyone else should be excited. But it's like, if you want to think, like, how do stories impact, you've got to think about who's receiving it, and if they're not going to get anything from it, they're just.
We're not going to name names, but we did actually. One of our friends actually did this today, and it was quite funny because we'd just been talking about it, and it's like, oh my god, I can't believe they've just done this.
It was a complete coincidence that she just did it. It was so funny. She's actually she's quite successful, you know, but she does this all the time, but I just roll my eyes when I see it. Okay, so now I'm going to just demo it as if like a different way to say the same story, but in a way that possibly gets a better impact. Okay, so hey everyone, I'm in Bali. God, I've been put up by my client in this 5-star hotel, which is absolutely beautiful, but I'm really torn. I feel like I'm in this ivory tower in a place that I really love. I feel really cut off from the people of Bali. It's just really weird because I was here 25 years ago backpacking, and I had this amazing experience. I paid £1 and I was staying in this amazing little bed and breakfast by this woman who just treated me like my parents. She looked after me and made me food, and I just had this incredible experience of the Balinese people, and I got a real cultural experience. And even though it's great being in a 5-star hotel, I'm not complaining, I just feel kind of out of sorts here. So I'm going to go out and see if I can find this place I stayed at all those years ago. Has anyone been to Bali? Anyone's got any tips on where I should go?
So what was the impact on that, guys? How did that land with you? Interesting, says Luca. I feel involved, says Rebecca. Yeah, well, that was the impact on me. Authentic, says Harry. I was immediately engaged in what Nikki was saying because I felt what happened was that I immediately went somewhere in my mind. For me, it was Mauritius. So I went back there. So I was finding myself in Nikki's story. So I was engaged in it on that level. And I liked it because it was more reflective. It was more involving of me. as a reader or listener. And even though she was still talking about how successful she was, it was bringing up more of her perspective, her philosophy, and maybe what could evolve around that was some kind of brand story that she could work on.
Yeah. So this is an example of how you can have stories that fit in with your purpose or your values. So my brand story could be something about keeping it real or building relationships, and so that could be consistent with something I stand for as an artist or whoever. It wasn't a real story, by the way. I've actually just made them up.
No.
So it kind of just takes people to a place of more meaning. And that's what a good story should do. There should be a bit of a, ooh, wow, yeah, that's interesting. I've felt like that too at times. So we can connect on a deeper level. Okay, here's my next one, everybody. Hey, everyone. I'm running an exhibition on Friday with my latest pictures. It's called Money and Meaning. Come, it's going to be amazing. It's on Friday. Be there.
Anyone? Nothing. Yeah, I mean, I just feel vaguely annoyed. I used to get I used to get so many messages from PRs like this when I was a music journalist. They were like, "Oh, chatty, hi, hope you had a great weekend. Just thought I'd tell you about this new band, got a new single out this week. It's amazing." And it's like, why should I care? It's not specific. It's not involving me. It sounds a tiny bit desperate. It's vague. It's like, why should I care about your exhibition? And please don't tell me it's amazing. Let me experience it. It's very Essex.
It's very patronizing, but it's also, it doesn't stand for anything. There's no uniqueness when we don't get a sense of what's behind the exhibition, why you did it. So it just doesn't involve you. And I think a lot of people do this, they come to this, come to my gig or whatever, and we need more to hook people in. Okay, so I'm gonna try another way of hooking you in now. So Money and Meaning, how I gave up cigarettes. So I was a smoker until 10 years ago. I was smoking about 20, sometimes 30 cigarettes a day. And I was coughing a lot and I knew I had to give up smoking. So I decided, I got this piggy bank and I decided all the money I would save from giving up cigarettes, I put it in this money bank every single day. And I decided that one day I would use the money for something really, really meaningful and important. And as life went on, I got so desperate for a cigarette. And instead of having a cigarette, I would put the money in the piggy bank and I would work through my anxieties by making art. So I started painting. And every single time I would do a painting, because I heard to replace a habit, you need a new habit. And what's great, 10 years on, I've made so much work. I really developed as an artist. And I'm using the money that I saved to do my first exhibition. So I hope you can join me. It's called Money and Meaning. And I hope it will inspire you to think about the habits in your life that serve you, don't serve you.
Love it, says Luca. Why did you love it, Luca? Brill, yeah. I mean, when I first heard that, I just went, wow. It's not true, by the way.
It's not true.
It's engaging. Yeah, why is it engaging? Let's dig into this. Why was that engaging? Anyone? I mean, for me, it just wove this real, it's engaging, it's purposeful. It was a real hero's journey. It was, it kind of followed this narrative all the way through. Rebecca says, now I want to know more about the exhibition because it has a personality. It was heartfelt. It was about a personal struggle. There's something to learn. It engages you already in the work. You kind of want to see it now because you've heard some of the story behind it. So that's why it gives a fascinating context around the exhibition, and it gives hope. It gives encouragement.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like you're going to get something out of the experience.
And that's the important thing to remember, gang. Like when you're telling a story, you're kind of telling it for your audience. It's not just about you sharing. It's about how it will impact on your audience. So it's about being intentional about how you want them to feel and what you want them to get from the story. And that can be really powerful if you can see it from their perspective. Shall I do the last one?
I got one more.
One more. Okay. Hey gang, I did a gig last night. It was my album launch. It was fantastic. Had a packed house and it was rocking. The whole night was really brilliant. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Anyone? And yeah.
Sharon, you're so smart. I'm
so happy for you.
Harry's happy for me. Elaine thinks I'm egotistical.
Again, it was boring. It just gives a lot of facts. There's lots of information there, but there's no narrative arc. Yeah, Rebecca's glad she wasn't there. It's like it's not engaging. It's just a series of facts.
Yeah. So if it's facts, there's nothing to hook us in. Yeah. And that's what most journalists feel when they get press releases. When people say, "Hey, I've got a story," often they're very factual. And there's no meaning or anything interesting behind it. Okay, so I'm going to try again. Okay, so I was 10 years old and I really wanted to be a jazz musician. And I told my teacher that's what I wanted to do. And my teacher looked at me and said, "Nah, you'll be a pauper all your life. You should become something like an accountant or a doctor where you'll make money." And her opinion affected me my whole life. And I ended up doing a sensible job, and I went into IT, and I worked in IT for a long time, but I found it so soulless, and all I wanted to do was play my jazz guitar. And a few years ago, I started writing music in the evening. I started writing songs that, were from my heart. And I ended up giving up my job about 2 years ago and purposefully writing my first album. And I did a gig last night, and it was so meaningful to have everybody there for my first album launch. I just wish my teacher had been there. And I think we should always go for our dreams in life. My teacher gets it wrong. Most of us have been there.
Pass the tissue. Yeah. And I literally found myself leaning into the screen when you were telling that story. That's how a great story can pull you in and draw you in. And again, it was a whole journey, and it was really touching, and there was a sense of meaning and purpose in it. And that, yes, you got one over on the old teacher. Yeah, it makes you inspired to go for your own goal. Yeah, exactly. Again, we're finding ourselves in that story.
Yeah, so finding your stories, it might have been something that happened when you were 10 that linked to what you're doing now, or it might have been something that happened in an argument one day, or somebody said something to you. So stories are really, it's about thinking how your personal journey has affected your life now. Okay, so thanks everyone. We're going to just quickly look now at elements of great storytelling before we give you your homework, your storytelling homework. So just to quickly summarize what not to do with your story. The common mistakes are boring the me show. Tell me how to think or feel. It's amazing.
Don't do that.
Just facts and no story. That's boring. We want some sort of meaningful journey. And we want a deeper context. The audience can't connect or find themselves in your story. That's what not to do. So let's look at what to do instead then.
Yeah, let's do that. Yay. So do you want to talk through the first one?
Yeah, 3 elements of great storytelling. So if you saw Beb's blog the other day, she wrote about the 3 things that really make a difference. Now, this girl here it's Michelle Ullman again, who talked about her body scars. She got so vulnerable when she did her TED Talk, and she actually showed this picture of herself showing her scars. What was really interesting when I worked with Michelle, she did not want to get vulnerable. And when she first came to me to do her TED Talk, she was all about just wanting to sound powerful and tell people what she thought. And she was quite defended because she was so scared of losing her status. But actually, it's vulnerability that connects people. And we want to encourage you to be willing to share the stories in your life that might not be so pretty, but where you might have really struggled, and share something which is deep for you, because that is where people find themselves and connect with you in a more emotional way.
And I just to add something about vulnerability, because I'm sure some of you, especially you, Emily, and I know you feel like you say it can be quite draining having to go over a traumatic story. Vulnerability is not exposing yourself. It's not cutting yourself open. And I really like what Brene Brown says about vulnerability. Vulnerability is about having the courage to show up and be seen. And that doesn't mean showing everything. It's just actually show up, show us who you are. So just want to see what Emily says here. I got told by a psychologist the other day to be the bridge between where my audience is and where we all want to be, and not just the island on the other side. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. If you're so vulnerable that people can't connect with you, that's not going to work.
Yeah, and we do see this mistake sometimes. I know another person, one of the mistakes she makes is being vulnerable every time. Like, oh my God, I'm really struggling with this. And that's not that inspiring. That's her habit of just always expressing that she's having a difficult time. We're not suggesting you always have to be complaining about how insecure you're feeling. That's not in service of your audience. So thanks for bringing that up, Emily. What we mean by vulnerability is about sharing who you are, honestly, rather than putting on some sort of facade and trying to be something that you're not. So it's about being authentic and real, but in the service of your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when the story that I told at the beginning, you know, I told a story about two things that are two of the biggest things that have happened in my whole life. My dad having a stroke and my husband leaving.
Yeah.
But I actually told them in not in a dispassionate way. I felt it, but I wasn't spilling my guts.
Yeah.
But it was just in service of demonstrating the power of story.
Yeah, rather than bravado or collapse. Yeah, somewhere in the middle. And naturally the next bit might help. So yeah, Emily's trying to find the balance. And I think, you know, if you'll give us permission, we'll be honest with you, Emily, in our feedback where we feel like maybe that's too vulnerable or not vulnerable enough. And I think that's the beauty of having this group to develop your skills. Okay, so let's look at the next one, aspect of what's really important for great storytelling.
So this is struggle. There's really, it's quite simple. If it doesn't have a bit of a struggle in it, it's not a story. So it could be an inner struggle or something that you're dealing with on the outside, but there has to be this sense of you've overcome something. You've overcome an obstacle or a kind of inner critic of some kind. And the person that we've put on the slide to illustrate this is a photographer called Alice Joyner. And for 5 years, she suffered from a mental illness that manifested as a serious eating disorder. But in service of her art and her audience, she decided to talk about her inner conflicts in ID magazine. And she spoke about her struggle to accept herself and how photography helped her turn around her self-image. And it's very vulnerable what she talks about, but it's so much a part of her art that it's creating meaning for the reader around what she does. So she's not just sharing it for the sake of it, it's an integral part of her art. So that's what we mean when we say it's in service of the audience.
Yeah. Okay, and then the final thing is some kind of transformation. So we don't just want to end with the struggle. If we were just having the struggle and the vulnerability, it's kind of got to go somewhere. So we want to know that there's been some meaning found from it, or you've developed as a person, or your art came out of something that you've been through and something that you've learned. So transformation is the kind of the goal of where you've got to and what makes a good structure of a story.
So I'm just going to share another short video clip now of a guy called Richard McCann, and he has basically built an entire business around his story. I'll just play a little clip so you get a bit of a flavour of who he is.
At the children's home, we were greeted by the staff. They seemed to know, or they were expecting us, and they were fussing over us. I was quite enjoying this attention they were giving us until this police officer said, "I've got something to tell you." I'll never forget his words. I'll never forget what he did. He crouched down like this beside us and he said, "Your mum's been taken to heaven. You're not going to see her again." I'll never forget those words either. But we had no ideas what had taken place that night. Our photograph was taken at the children's home, and it appeared in the national newspapers. In fact, the picture that I'm going to show you appearing in the papers was how some of my mum's brothers and sisters discovered what happened that night, and that is that their sister, or our mum, had been murdered. There's no easy way to say it.
Oof.
She was found on the field at the back of the house, yards from where me and my sister Sonia walked, and she'd been stabbed 14 times. Hit twice over the head with a hammer by a man we later discovered called Peter Sutcliffe. Peter Sutcliffe, for those of you that are from outside the UK, was a serial killer that murdered 13 women in the north of England. The press, the media, they called him the Yorkshire Ripper. My mum, Wilma McCann, was the first.
Ooh, wow.
So he goes on to tell a lot more of his story. I mean, that's really where it starts, when he loses his mum at the age of 5, first victim of the Yorkshire Ripper. And obviously that affects his life in a fairly major way. He gets into trouble, he goes to prison. There's a whole story about his own life, but how he finds this redemption at the end, and he now runs a public speaking business. He encourages people to get up and speak who haven't spoken before. And he works for the Forgiveness Project as well, because he forgave his mother's murderer. And he runs his public speaking business. He's written a book which was a #1 bestseller, and that it's just about to be made into a film. So very incredibly tragic, dramatic story, but he has basically built an entire business around it.
Yeah. So we just want to emphasize you don't have to have had a really traumatic or huge story. You don't have to tell a really dramatic. We had that simple story about the woman finding the driftwood earlier on, which isn't a kind of huge conflict, is it? But
Earth-shattering.
Was that?
Not earth-shattering, but it was really beautifully done.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point, actually, Bev. She's not that vulnerable in her storytelling, is she? What would be your opinion on what makes that a good story?
She's not super vulnerable, but she doesn't need to be, because there isn't anything in it that she needs to be very, very vulnerable about. But I think she's very real. She's very authentic. I think she's very heartfelt in what she says. And I guess for her, she might feel like she is being quite vulnerable, because she's talking about her family, about how she works, how she puts her art together. So she might feel like that is quite a vulnerable thing to do.
Yeah.
But she has put it out there.
So that's why we wanted to show a more simple story. So vulnerability doesn't have to have been something tragic that's happened to you. It could have been something quite simple. Like, I'm sure in her story, it was like, I couldn't not do my art again. I felt so disconnected from my art, and I really wanted to get back into it. And so I started finding driftwood, and I realized how much I loved Cornwall. So it doesn't have to be something big. The struggle can be small and just something where you've grown and how your artwork grows. Does that make sense, everyone? Because these last examples have been quite dramatic ones, and they really don't need to be. So we're going to end with a piece of homework for you to do now, because we want this to lead to you starting to develop your stories. So we have a handout. Now I'm going to just share the screen to show this handout. I think I can anyway. Does anyone have any questions up to this stage? Questions or comments before we talk about the exercise and what we're going to ask you to do? Okay. So what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to do an exercise at home. And at home, in your own home or in your office, wherever you need to be, which is going to be helping you to find some stories. And the exercise is calling Finding Stories to Promote Your Project. So the first stage is that we'd like you to think about something that you want to promote. So for the musicians or composers, or if you haven't done your album yet, you might think about promoting something you've done already in the past, or perhaps a gig that you would like to do. that you'd like to have some, you know, prepare yourself to do some promotion for a gig. If you haven't done the album, don't fixate on the album that you haven't done. Focus on something you can promote. Okay, so that's the first thing. Choose a project. And we would like you to do some reflections on different stages of this project. So I'll just share my screen so that we can show it. Can I show it? Yeah, here we go. Can you see that? Can you see the exercise? Bev, has that exercise come up?
No, can only see the top of it. Can you make the...
Can you see it now?
No.
Oh, I don't know why that's the case. Okay, I don't know. Okay, can you see that?
See that, yes.
Okay, sorry, we should have made this. I thought I could just share it on the screen, but obviously that's not working. So basically what it is, it's to get you to think about a project in different stages. First of all, where were you before the project started? What was a tipping point or moment that triggered a need to change to start your project? And then where did you get to as a result of completing the project? And the last question is, what did you learn and what wisdom could other people learn from? Okay. We're gonna send it to you, Sharon, and we're gonna put it in the forum as well. Don't worry. So just to give you an example, I did this exercise for myself. So I was thinking about my project. I just thought, well, that's Nikki Moran Creatives. That's my business. So where was I before? So I used to work in the corporate world before I did my coaching for creatives. I was a corporate trainer and I was really, really unfulfilled, really miserable. I'd lost my creativity. I was working for money. I was really, really miserable. The tipping point for me that triggered a need for change was a moment when I was sitting in a hotel in Birmingham and I looked at a grey suit hanging in my wardrobe and it just made me cry. I saw this grey suit and I just thought, who have I become? Who have I become that is in my wardrobe and I'm wearing that tomorrow to do a job that I don't care about, to teach people I don't really care that much about? And I knew I had to change. So the change was I decided to retrain and I set up my coaching for creatives because I wanted to do work I really cared about. So I set up my company, Coaching for Creatives, and I now work for myself. I have my own clients. I adore my clients and I have freedom to do my own thing and make money from what I love doing. So what I learned from it and wisdom I could share with others is I can choose to do work I love and I can thrive, and I don't have to make money from something I hate, and neither do you. So that's an example of how I use that story structure. Okay, do you want to share yours, Bev?
I haven't got it in front of me, to be honest. So that's
Can I read it out?
Yeah, you can read it out.
Bev's was, I was working as an editor to pay the bills. I was feeling undervalued and underappreciated. That was before. Then the tipping point, the change came, and she said, I had to say no to a public speaking training gig that would have earned me more money and given me more satisfaction. And then where was she as a result? Leaving my desk job to become fully self-employed and able to take the jobs I really loved and wanted. And what you learned was, if you value your skills rather than focusing on bread and butter jobs, the meaningful work will come. So that's the message that she learned from. Okay, so Rebecca says, Nikki, can you wear your grey suit story on the Wear Wellbeing group, please? It's so good for fashion as a communicator. No. Sorry, Rebecca. Nice try. No, I think I ditched it. Okay, so is that clear what we're asking you to do? So we want you to come up with stories. You might have one story, or I actually had like 5 or 6. It was like the before was fairly the same. It was like, yeah, I was really miserable. that had different scenarios. Like another scenario was I was in a meeting and I just wanted to scream. So you might have several things that come out of this. So just kind of keep coming up with the ideas. But it's the basis for a hero's journey structure that we'll talk about next time. Okay?
We just want you to share one of the stories in the Facebook group in the next 2 weeks. So you've got a couple of weeks to think about this.
Yes.
And when you're ready, just share
one story.
One story. It doesn't have to be very long.
That structure.
It's just the outline of it. It doesn't have to be super detailed.
Lucas says, Van Gogh only sold one painting during his lifetime, Red Vineyards at Arles. This painting now resides at the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. The rest of Van Gogh's more than 900 paintings were not sold or made famous until after his death. Oh my God, that's tragic, isn't it? Great story. Yeah.
Great story.
Yeah.
We don't want you to be Van Gogh.
We don't want you to do that then, look. It's a good story though.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so is that clear what we're asking you to do? Are there any questions around this?
As I say, we'll put this handout in the Facebook group, the storytelling exercise, and a handout about the 3 elements of a compelling story.
Yeah.
We'll post
those. Can you just put yes, this is clear, or no, what are you talking about? Can you just put so we know? In fact, I'm going to mute you all. I'm muting you all now.
All right,
yes.
great.
Yes.
Hi everyone, is that clear?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you all. If it's not clear or you've got any questions, if you're watching this afterwards, just put some questions in the group, because then if you're unclear, other people will be, and we can answer any questions in there. So we're looking forward to hearing your stories, everyone.
Can't wait.
And we will be reading them and making little comments afterwards. And please comment on each other's stories, because that's what it's all about. Okay, lovely. So we're bang on 7:30. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Bye. See you. Bye.